So Presence Absence is a huge piece. It's about an hour long, and it's your biggest work, but it's also kind of your most personal work, isn't it? I was wondering if you could say a bit about where it all started.
Yes, it's in some ways it's a kind of not an end point, but it's certainly kind of a staging point in what I've been doing, and it's the result of several different strands kind of coming together. First of all, there's the whole thing about Zen Buddhism and chanting. I mean, I used to be in a choir when I was a child, in a Gregorian chant choir in London, and so I'm kind of used to this tradition of fairly monotonous type music with no, in that case, with no accompaniment. And then when I was in the States working, I became involved. I became a Zen practitioner in a monastery, and we used to do daily chanting. And so the whole chant line, I mean, in some ways, when I began chanting in Zen, I found that rather boring. It seemed to lack anything interesting. It was just a sort of monotonous chant. But as I did it over the years, I realised that there's a lot in it, and also there's a lot in terms of for one personally, but also in the community. We used to chant in a circle. I think the community aspect, you kind of pick up all kinds of things about other people as you're chanting with them. So the chant line was one important element. The other element is I'm a mathematician, and I started working with you as a PhD student, and you were my supervisor. I still are my supervisor. And you introduced me to James Tenney and his particular way of dealing with harmony, harmonic spaces and so on. And I realized almost immediately that this was something that was interesting mathematically, and something that hadn't really been developed by James Tenney mathematically. I mean, he took it in some direction, and certainly took it in a huge direction musically, but in terms of the underlying structure, he hadn't really developed it, and so that was something that I could do, and so it became kind of interesting, almost like experimentally, to see what that would lead to musically.
So this really brings two of the most important elements of your working and indeed your sort of spiritual life together in one piece. The fact that the work is kind of making a particular contribution, that of a mathematician, to harmonic research, if you like, after James Tenney's work. But it's also bringing in this whole world of Zen chanting and Buddhist spirituality as well, because the whole piece is I seem to remember you saying at one point that you were going to write a secular requiem, and it's not quite that, is it? But Presence Absence is one way of conceiving of life and death, I think, in Buddhist tradition, and all the texts in the piece refer to that. Just to go back to that question about the Zen chanting, and it's got this community aspect. It underpins the whole piece. I mean, we actually have, it's almost like found objects. These are real Zen chants. They're not sort of fake ones that you've made up for the occasion. They're actually the things that you used to chant when you were a Zen monk. I wonder if you could say a bit more about what the chanting of those chants meant for you, but also means, to the community. I mean, why do they do it? Why is it so protracted? What does the monotony of it? Why must it be monotonous in that way? Because that's a very important aspect of it.
Well, I think it is, from the Zen point of view, I think it's one of the sort of spiritual exercises that one does. So there's sitting meditation, which is just done in silence, facing a wall usually. There's walking, and there's chanting, and those are really the three things that one does, apart from eating and all the rest of it. But I particularly found the chanting interesting from the spiritual point of view, not so much the musical. it really is the community aspect of it. And it actually does relate to an important experience I had when I was a Zen student or a Zen monk. In that there's a thing in Zen called Satori, which is like an enlightenment experience. And one of the things that we another of the activities we do is we do these koans. In fact, the English text in that piece they're taken from this book, No Gate Gateway, and they are a collection of koans. And the koan is a way that you work with a teacher, trying to tease out whatever kind of wisdom there might be in each of the koans. And I was working on a koan, and I'd been working on it for about a year, and I hadn't got anywhere with it at all, actually. Each time I would be interviewed with the teacher, have an interview, and I would recite my koan, and the teacher would give me a response, and it was always no for about a year.
Right.
But on this particular day, we had an hour chant, which was the Om Tare chant, and we started doing it. And well, I won't go through all the personal experiences relating to it, but it became a very big emotional and almost a kind of a grief experience. It was. I don't know, the chant set something free, and it was like kind of feeling grief for everybody, not just for myself, and then a feeling of lightness.
Right.
And then I went in to see the teacher after this, and he said yes, and I realised I got it. I knew I'd got it. Actually.
Right. Yes.
And so there was something about that whole experience. So chanting has meant a lot to me. In the piece, from the musical point of view, I mean, we have the chants themselves, the Shingyo chants 3 times, and also the Om Tare. But also in the way that I tried to set the text, similar kind of idea in the lines in general. For each of the singers were, I mean, we had harmony, but each of the lines were generally fairly on one note.
Yes.
So I tried to carry the chant through the whole of the piece, not just through the chant episodes.
Yes, I mean, one of the interesting things about the piece is that it has a kind of ascetic quality, even though the actual sort of sound texture as a whole is incredibly rich. And extremely complex, because you've got 3 choirs, you've got all of the incredibly complex timbres and resonances of the percussion, you've got these 2 bass trombones, and then of course, as if that wasn't enough, you've also got this harmonic underlay from electronics, which are playing these very complex mathematically derived sine tone chords. So there's this sort of interplay between the sort of the textural richness, but also this sense of sort of single-minded droning, I suppose, is the best way to put it, in all of the layers of the vocal music. So I was very struck by when we put it together, you know, that none of the parts on their own is lyrical. I mean, that's completely alien to the piece. It's more monumental. It's monumental in every respect. It's like different facets of this drone, this drone chant, sort of, I don't know, expanded and kind of placed on top of each other, accreted really in this truly monumental sound.
I mean, the way that I worked on the piece was that I started with the electronics. In fact, I started with the 10E harmonies. And essentially, the idea is that with these harmonic spaces, is that you can create kind of more or less dispersion in your harmony. So you have the kind of points, which are the different pitches, and I kind of visualize them in a space, many-dimensional space. So the idea was that we started with harmony of very high diversity, maximum diversity for the pitches that I was allowing, and it gradually in the end ends up with a single pitch. So what I did was not all those pitches were pitches that were equal tempered pitches. So from those, I picked out the quarter tone pitches and the semitone pitches, and then I could then assign them to singers or instruments. That was the kind of way of working. In terms of, there was only one moment when I kind of allowed myself a little bit of what I would call lyricism. That was the final movement, where there was just a little variation in melody, right in the very last
Yes,
bit.
yeah. I mean, that's very striking after an hour of music. Well, for a start, the harmony sort of clarifies, and something that, yes, as you say, the chant is suddenly inflected by just going down or up a little bit, and so there's this seed of melody is sort of planted at that point, and then a piece ends. So maybe this is the seeds of future pieces or something. And you mentioned sort of dispersal in space, this idea of harmonic space, because space or spaciousness or positioning in space also seems to be a very important part of the work. And in Durham Cathedral, we were able to actually use quite a lot of space. I mean, we could have used even more, I suppose, but you've got these three choirs, which puts us in mind of like the sort of Renaissance polychoral traditions. You've got the chanting choir who only ever they drone on a monotone, so you don't actually give them a pitch. You say, choose whatever pitch is right for you and chant on that, which is authentic to the
tradition.
Practice. Yeah. And then you've got a chorus which sings, as you say, it's sort of in semitones, and then you've got a sort of solo choir which sings in slightly more intricate harmony in quarter tones. So that there's a space between them timbrally, but there's also a space in the actual physical performance space. You've got two trombones and also this array of percussion. So the whole thing does feel as if you've imagined it with a lot of space between the elements in a large area. When you heard it in Durham Cathedral, what was your response? I mean, was it making the sound you're expecting? And as a listener, were you getting that sense of depth?
Yeah, one of the responses was that even though we were in Durham Cathedral, this huge building, like we look at it outside, it's a massive structure, but in some ways it also felt quite intimate, that we were in this little square, really, which was the crossing, and everybody was within that space. And so I didn't really feel this kind of sense of vast open spaces. I really didn't know what to expect. Obviously I had some sort of idea what it would sound like, and I knew what the electronics would sound like. But I'm glad that I gave the percussion such a lot to do. I thought that worked very well, actually. The bass trombones, the idea of them was really from the piece by Jonathan Harvey, one of his pieces. I can't actually remember the name of it now, but it begins. He's trying to simulate Tibetan horns. There's large horns that are. And so I had that kind of idea in my mind when I was using it. I thought that gave some kind of monumental aspect to the piece, having those two bass trombones.
Yeah. And could you imagine it in another space being more spacious, or is that become a sort of ideal performance for you now?
No, I think it will be different. I mean, it was only in my wildest dreams that it would actually be performed in Durham Cathedral. We had ideas that it might be performed in one of the colleges in Durham University. I guess my ultimate fantasy is to have it performed in the Albert Hall.
Oh, okay. Well,
so then
we'll work on it.
Yeah, that's right. So then, I mean, I think that's be a great space for the piece really to
yeah.
Or
because hearing it in the surround would certainly
or a space of that kind. I mean, it doesn't have to be the Albert Hall, but it was interesting working with the chanters, because you talked about the chanters. We called them the Berwick chanters, but actually they were recruited from Berwick and Northumberland and Newcastle. And they weren't professional, they weren't even singers. I mean, some of them would classify themselves as tone deaf, so-called.
Right.
And so it was very interesting working with them. I started off with a couple of workshops in Berwick and tried to recruit a group of people that we could, that would be interested to do something like this. And I once we realised it was going to be in Durham Cathedral, I always had that little carrot to say, well, this is going to be performed in Durham Cathedral. But it was being... I'm glad that I put something in because they got a great deal out of it. And they told me that, you know. And
well, you mentioned the community aspect of the whole roots in Zen chanting. And I mean, for me, it was incredibly important that we had 3 completely different groups of singers or vocalists, shall we say, these non-singers in many ways. I mean, some of them might be singers, but some of them might not even say they were musicians. They were just interested in trying the chanting. And then you've got the student musicians of the chamber choir, probably tomorrow's professionals, but not yet at that level. And then you've got the 8 singers of Ex Audi who are today's professionals. So bringing those groups together in a way which kind of dignified each of them and made a kind of holistic sense was an immensely important part of the piece, I think.
And it was lovely to hear them at the end, all singing the chant. I thought that was an idea that came up within the rehearsal, that rather than just have the chanters finish the piece, actually have everybody, the 3 groups. I thought that worked very well, actually. In the audience, that was a great moment just to hear everybody singing together.
Yeah.
And I mean, having Ex Audi was also another big motivation at the beginning. I think I've been working on that piece for maybe 2 years, and knowing that would have the possibility of Ex Audi singing was a kid.
Well, again, it gives that extra opportunity to explore your harmonic universe with the sort of precision of the quarter tone tuning.
So how did you feel when you were conducting it? Because you had some of the time you had headset on.
Yeah, I must say I only really enjoyed the full splendour of the piece. I think I can use the word splendid because it really is. It has a kind of awesome aspect to it. When I listened back on the recording afterwards, because I was tied to a click track, which is just the way of a lot of performance today. We had to keep absolutely in time with the electronics because as I think you explained, I mean everything was sort of derived from that electronic layer of harmony. So it was happening simultaneously, sort of picking notes out of the sort of surrounding atmosphere. So that was my job, and I kind of just got on with it and hoped that everything was working. It sounded as if it was working, but the whole effect came afterwards. And as I say, I found the piece incredibly rich, but also to have this austerity. And I can't think of that many pieces that achieve that particular effect. I think either pieces are rich but not austere, or they're austere in every way. But to have so many massive forces, but each part of the whole not actually doing very much within its layer, but just simply adding a layer to the whole thing, is actually a very unusual way of composing that obviously is derived from the very particular and very personal way that you've explored your compositional universe in the last few years.
Yes, in terms of the kind of the texture of the piece, in the last year of its composition, I was with your thoughts as well, because in some ways you reacted to different drafts of the piece that I was giving you or showing you, sort of gradually adding more detail, particularly into the vocal parts, because I mean it could have just been the electronic. I mean that would have been as pure as you could have had it. Just the electronics would have sounded for 70 minutes. And so it was a matter of adding more stuff, but also when to stop, knowing the point where I didn't really want to go any further.
Yeah.
So,
and there's a sense that your approach was quite speculative. I sense that you didn't quite know whether you stopped in the right place, and I hope you feel listening back that you did, because I think you did. Just one more thing to close on, which is this. You've sort of alluded to the idea that a piece could be sort of public-facing or private-facing slightly. So, as you say, it could have just been that electronic layer. And that would have been, in some way, a sort of private ritual. You can imagine that as being a sort of headphone requiem.
right.
Something for someone to listen to in a completely private space. And the more layers you added, and the more choirs you added, the more it became this public ritual. And again, I think I would want to pay you the compliment, which is that it's brave, I think, to stand up and say, I'm going to make a big public ritual, and I'm going to make a piece which is on a grand scale and involves lots of people coming together and exploring these quite mysterious, very spiritual, very deep feelings and thoughts in a public space. And of course it was remarkable, to be given the opportunity to explore what is, on the face of it, a Buddhist perspective within a Christian building. But it made perfect sense on a day. And what I will remember from the experience is that sense of sharing something which had both public and private aspects with this whole group of people. Do you feel the same way about the piece?
Yes, it was definitely. I felt that I would like to communicate something of my own experience of Zen to people. But Zen is an austere tradition, and it took me several years to start to appreciate some of its depth. For example, even in the chanting. So, but I wanted people from my family to come and feel at the end of it, that was something interesting there. It wasn't just an hour of sitting against the wall, kind of looking at the wall.
Yeah.
So it had something that people could kind of or get something out of.
Of course, yeah.
But at the same time, still preserve that kind of aesthetic.
So that you weren't sort of cheapening or going against the spirit of the Zen chanting that you'd done, but somehow opened it up in a very personal way to other people.
They're kind of paradoxical statements, a lot of the texts, which I only began to appreciate, as I was talking earlier on, by this kind of bashing my head against a brick wall with some of them. Yeah. But I guess I was just trying to convey some of my own feelings about those texts, which I hope other people would appreciate at the same time.
That's right. And these things aren't easy, and they don't have to be easy. And the piece in many ways wasn't an easy listen, and yet it was absolutely absorbing and felt to me like a compelling statement of these principles. My children came, and they're very young, and they were gripped the whole way through. So that's something.
And I am grateful that it was performed. I had the opportunity. You made it happen, along with a lot of other people, people at Durham, Eric and so on. I am grateful that we had the resources to actually get something like that performed in Durham Cathedral. So it was a marvellous thing to actually do, and then be there in the audience as well, listening to it. So.
Indeed. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.